Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my singular pleasure to invite Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India and the incumbent Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, to enlighten us with his trademark wisdom and globally renowned erudition through a special address that would launch us on our 3-day voyage. Please join me in welcoming the Ambassador.
Chairman, National Maritime Foundation Director, National Maritime Foundation, former naval chiefs, very senior serving naval chiefs, distinguished members of the audience. I feel honored to have been given this opportunity to say a few things about the subject that this is the subject of today's program, Resource, Geopolitics and Security in the Indo-Pacific. When first I was contacted to deliver this talk, I missed the resource part. I just heard geopolitics and security in the Indo-Pacific, and I said to myself that this is indeed my cup of tea. I've been speaking about this for so long, very easy subject. But when I started working on the subject and focused on the resource part, then I understood that this is more complicated. But then I thought, of course, it narrows down the scope of the subject, because in terms of the geopolitical and security challenges in the Indo-Pacific, we are pretty clear what they are, and a lot has been written on them. But it's a very useful subject to focus on today, and many of the challenges that we are facing as humanity in terms of the resource crunch that we're going to face, and this has been brought out by the Chairman, National Maritime Foundation, very well. In fact, he's stolen a lot of my thunder by mentioning many things which I intended also to say. Now, we are discussing the Indo-Pacific in the context of resource, geopolitics, and security. Now, we all know that the Indo-Pacific is home to more than half the world's population, and it accounts for 60% of the global GDP, as well as 2/3 of global economic growth. So the subject, therefore, becomes very pertinent in terms of looking at the future. Now, the geographical spread of the Indo-Pacific has always been a little uncertain. What exactly constitutes the Indo-Pacific? For some time, it was not very clear whether the Indo part covered also the Arabian Sea or ended on the west coast of India. And if you talk of the Pacific, then Pacific is very large. It goes right to the western coast of the Americas. But I don't think that we cover this large body of water. So we have in mind what the Indo-Pacific, the manner in which the Indo-Pacific concept has evolved. I would say this is an area which today covers one from the east coast of Africa to the western Pacific, and not to that part of the Pacific that touches North and South America. And this coincides geopolitically and security-wise with the remit of the Quad, for instance, or the broad framework of the ASEAN-centered approach to a regional architecture in Asia, or for that matter, the European Union's, French and the UK's Indo-Pacific strategy. These strategies do not include the Pacific coast of the Americas and the richness of resources of that geography. This part of the Pacific is covered by APEC, but then India is not a member of APEC. In fact, if we see the origin of the concept of the Indo-Pacific, it is rooted in former Prime Minister Abe's concept of the confluence of the two seas, which evolved into the Indo-Pacific concept with the Quad as its political base. The Quad is undoubtedly a geopolitical concept, but it has a security dimension too, but is underplayed by all the members. Various aspects of Quad cooperation are emphasized, but if you look at what they discuss, they are not resource-oriented, except in the case of illegal and unreported fishing. So, to my mind, the issues involved in the Indo-Pacific area are essentially sovereignty-related, with security as a major driver. And therefore, geopolitics and security in Indo-Pacific is a frequently discussed subject. But resource geopolitics and security in Indo-Pacific is not, which is why today's discussion is very pertinent. And lots of issues that we have to grapple with have already been underlined by the chairman of the National Maritime Security Foundation. Now, the question arises whether the tensions in the Indo-Pacific region are resource-related or primarily geopolitical, with security at the center. It should be recalled that resource geopolitics and security were central to the colonial project, about which Admiral has spoken in detail. The prosperity of the West relied to a large extent on access to the vast resources of the colonized countries. While the colonial phase of history is over, there is still concern about neo-colonialist policies operating in open or disguised form in relations between what may loosely be called North and South, or the developed and the developing world. Globalization has no doubt raised prosperity levels in many non-Western countries, but it has also aggravated inequalities at the global level. The gap between the technology-rich and resource-rich developing countries has not been sufficiently bridged. Critical and emerging technologies will largely remain the preserve of the technologically advanced West. For many of these technologies, the critical minerals required are largely in the non-Western countries. This is where geopolitics and security comes into play. The structures of the international order are so designed that the developing countries with abundant natural resources will largely continue to be victims of geopolitical and security maneuvers of the developed countries. Those possessing natural resources generally lack capital, and they need foreign capital and technology to develop their resources, and this exposes them to the maneuvers that I just referred to. This is true particularly in the case of relations with African countries with abundant natural resources. In the Indo-Pacific region, I have the east coast of Africa in mind. But these divisions between North and South have been blurred with a country like China, for example, becoming the biggest manufacturing power and needing access to natural resources to feed its vast industrial machine, its need for critical raw materials to maintain its dominance in green technologies, for instance, besides access to agricultural resources of other countries in the region to feed its vast population with rising living standards. China's phenomenal rise has changed the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region and well beyond. China is at the center of geopolitics and security in the Indo-Pacific, which is also resource-oriented in part. It is claiming exclusive military and economic rights over large parts of the South China Sea. China's 9 or 10-dash line, I hope there's not 11, 12, or 13, which would make the South China Sea as Beijing's lake, as Abe said, is to change the balance of military power in the region by extending the reach of China's aircraft and missiles to challenge US military power in the region. China, naturally, is seeking to strategically control the important shipping lanes. The South China Sea is a vital crossroads for both intra-Asian trade as well as for trade with the rest of the world, including India, as some of the most dynamic economies in the world are in the region, and they trade with all geographies. And this includes China, the biggest exporting country, as well as Japan and South Korea. Over 60% of global maritime trade passes through these waters, amounting to $3.29 trillion, according to a 2016 estimate. It is believed that the South China Sea has fairly abundant oil and natural gas, approximately 11 billion barrels of petroleum and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in proved and probable reserves, according to one estimate which I saw. But these are largely in uncontested areas close to the coasts. Underwater exploration for oil has occurred off the coasts of Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, and of course China. There is a conflict between China and Vietnam over drilling in contested areas. In the past, China has protested against the ONGC drilling in Vietnamese waters that China claims, but ONGC is still operating in this area. For India too, resource geopolitics in the Western Pacific is important. India plans to increase the investment in Russia's Far East to get access to the rich resources, to its rich resources, be it coal, oil, natural gas, etc. And if as this investment is made, it has to be then transported to India, which therefore makes these channels of sea lanes of communication in the South China Sea very important. And that is why the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea is important to India as well as to others. The projected Vladivostok-Chennai corridor will also pass through these waters. In the context of the opening of the Arctic route, free and unhindered access through these waters becomes strategically of great importance too. As it happens, 55% of India's trade passes through the South China Sea and the Malacca Strait. The South China Sea is rich in marine life. It is a heavily fished area and is the main source of animal protein for this densely populated area. The regional countries want to retain or exercise rights to these fishing stocks. China is claiming sovereignty over the continental shelf of countries like Philippines and Indonesia, for example, contrary to UNCLOS. Apart from all this, mineral deposits in the South China Sea are being exploited, such as titanophorus, magnetite, zircon, monazite, tin gold, and chromite. In the Indian Ocean, resource geopolitics and security is liable to become sharper as China increases its presence there. Seabed mining will be part of global competition for resources. Nodules containing nickel, cobalt, iron, and massive sulfide deposits of manganese, copper, iron, nickel, cobalt, iron, zinc, silver, and gold are present in sizable quantities on the seabed. China is preparing in a big way to mine minerals like copper, nickel, cobalt, and manganese from the seabed. These are critical materials needed in vast quantities to electrify the global economy and cut dependence on fossil fuels. I've seen photographs of a seabed mining platform that China seems to have built. It's quite humongous and pretty frightening to look at in terms of its size. The International Seabed Authority is still figuring out how mining should be regulated because there are serious issues of pollution. And some environmental groups want actually an outright ban. In the Indian Ocean, coastal sediments are important sources of titanium, zirconium, tin, zinc, and copper. Historically, the Indian Ocean has been a playground of geopolitics and security for centuries. Admiral, the chairman of the MNF, mentioned the colonial era very rightly. It began with the exploring the maritime routes to India in search for the resources of this region, which was later extended to Southeast Asia. The western rim of the Indian Ocean is flush with oil and gas resources. Resource-related geopolitics and security has marked this area for several decades. The volatility of this area, because of its hydrocarbon resources, continues. And it was rightly mentioned again by the Admiral that we've had wars in this region because of the strategy of controlling its hydrocarbon resources. The Indian Ocean is rich in natural resources. 40% of the world's offshore oil production takes place in the Indian Ocean basin. The Indian Ocean holds 16.8% of the world's proven oil reserves and 27.9% of proven natural gas resources. Nearly 80% of India's crude oil requirement is imported by sea via the Indian Ocean. Fishing in the Indian Ocean grew by 300% from 1950 to 2018, reaching 6.5 million tons annually. However, unregulated fishing on the high seas in the Indian Ocean is putting seafood supplies at risk. The existing legal framework for fisheries in the Indian Ocean suffers from regulatory gaps. China has expanded its maritime footprint in the Indian Ocean through its fishing fleet. There are suspicions that its fishing fleets are part of its military surveillance and intelligence networks. Indian Ocean economy is accounted for 35.5% of global iron production and 17.8% of world gold production in 2017. The Indian Ocean Rim countries are faced with the common pressing challenges of overexploitation of natural marine resources. Human security challenges are arising from climate change, pressing challenges of overexploitation of natural marine resources. Human security challenges are arising from climate change impact, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and extreme weather events. Climate change-induced phenomena such as extreme weather events and rising ocean temperatures adversely affect the reproductive pattern and quality of aquatic life in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The negative impacts of climate change extend beyond land-based agriculture to include fishing and aquaculture activities, which are significant components of agricultural output of the Indo-Pacific nations. As the population of the Indo-Pacific region increases in the coming decades, its impact on food security and economy from marine resources would become more substantial. In the Indo-Pacific, as elsewhere, the oceans, seas, and coastal areas contribute to food security and poverty eradication. And yet the oceans are under severe threat by human activities. Smuggling, illegal fishing, and human trafficking are also major concerns. The lack of regional maritime security architecture has prompted major powers to compete for control over these resources and sea lanes. Most of the Indian Ocean countries have formulated their own fisheries regulations. They lack proper standards, guidelines, coherent regional arrangement, and enforcement mechanism owing to limited data and capacity constraints. India has proposed a cooperative framework to handle maritime issues in the Indian Ocean. India's objectives, as outlined by Prime Minister Modi in 2015, under the banner of SAGA, Security and Growth for All in the region, are to seek a climate of trust and transparency, respect for international maritime rules and norms by all countries, sensitivity to each other's interests, peaceful resolution of maritime issues, and increase in maritime cooperation. The focus of the blue economy is important for preserving the oceans as a source of human security. In the Mauritius Declaration on Blue Economy on September 2015, the Indian Ocean Rim Association recognized the need for urgent action towards improved governance structures to preserve the ocean resources for future generations. The blue economy aims at sustainable management of ocean resources in collaborations across borders and sectors through a variety of partnerships. It was already mentioned, Goal 14 of the Sustainable Development Goals, Life Below Water, outlines the imperative need to increase cooperation for conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources. The issues that the island states face are particularly important as they are concerned with the non-traditional security threats from climate change, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, piracy, and oil spills as the biggest security threats in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. These issues rarely make it to the top of the list of security concerns for major powers in the region. The gap between how these two groups of countries conceive of Indo-Pacific security needs to be bridged. And I'll end with a couple of comments on what was said by the chairman about the need for resource collaboration. I don't think that we are anywhere close to that. What has happened to the blowing up of the Nord Stream gas pipeline and the fact that the energy context between Russia and Europe, energy trade, has been ended, despite the fact that Europe is a huge beneficiary of cheap Russian oil and gas, and Russia needs those resources, needs the funds coming from the export of these resources, shows that even when one is facing extremely serious challenges of geopolitics and security, there is not enough will to do something which should be natural and obvious and be beneficial to all concerned. And bringing China into a collaborative mode in terms of resource collaboration, to my mind, is also unlikely in the foreseeable future. And finally, with regard to looking at the future and how we're going to cope with the increasing population and the stress on resources, it is absolutely right that there should be more cognizance of this problem if humanity is to survive. But I don't think that the developed world and the developing world are anywhere close to facing this challenge together. Our Prime Minister has rightly advocated life. You know, change your lifestyle to take care of the environment. And this was very much part of what was in the joint statement issued at the G20 summit, which we shared last year. But unless there is this consciousness that the brown economy will lead us to an ultimate disaster, and it will lead us to an ultimate disaster because the consumption of global resources by the developing countries is huge. And unless there is a change in their lifestyle, I don't think we're going to find a solution. So whether I end on a pessimistic note or a less pessimistic note, I leave you to judge. But I think, and I'll end with this, it's very important that we are now focusing on this subject today of the resource geopolitics and security in the Indo-Pacific Ocean because it touches the life of all of us and our future. Thank you.